Hello friends, Nayaswami Raman here, and it's Ask a Yogi time. I have a somewhat delicate and difficult subject I want to bring up, and it might take more than one of these broadcasts. It's the question of depression. Now, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not going to talk about clinical depression. I'm going to talk about what I call existential depression. What I mean by that is could be called spiritual depression. Some might even call it the dark night of the soul, but that's overly dramatized, and I would rather not speak of that in the context of depression. I forget the statistic, but depression is widespread in our society today. I sometimes think it's because in our society today, relative to the past and history and the Middle Ages and so forth, we are relatively healthy, relatively secure, relatively prosperous, and so we have more time to think about the fact or to experience the simple fact that most of the goals of human beings don't quite live up to what they promise us. And so we actually have the opportunity to realize that the best of all worlds in outward terms and satisfactions is simply not enough. I've heard it said that among wealthy people is the highest rate of suicide. I've never tried to verify that, but I totally believe it because wow, you have everything most people want, and you're totally bored. How many houses can you possibly own and find pleasure in, etc., etc.? I won't go on from there. And so this is the kind of depression I'm talking about, and I'm speaking to and about devotees, not just worldly people. In the famous Mahabharata and in the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata, in chapter 1, the great warrior Arjuna, warrior and devotee, slumps in his chariot, depressed at the prospect of having to deal with his path of enlightenment, to deal with and overcome all of the attachments and habits, worldly habits. Now, Arjuna was a great saint, but never mind. He's speaking and acting on our behalf. What I see in my life with the devotees with whom I'm privileged to be surrounded by is I do see, like the rest of our culture, relative health, relative prosperity, relative intelligence, relative skills and success. I see relatively happy marriages and so forth among devotees, between devotees. And yet I see devotees who experience depression. And I think as devotees, one aspect of this is Arjuna's lament, which is that, we're devotees, we're seeking God, we're seeking transcendence, we're seeking liberation, etc., etc. But we still have a lot of other things to work out. And so we find ourselves, maybe we get married. Maybe as a devotee, among the people I know, we live in this wonderful community with other devotees. It seems like, and we have enough to get by. We're not dirt poor, as they say. And so we have everything. We have a meditation practice every day. We love to chant. And maybe we've even had a child in our life. And yet, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you, really. Years ago, when I worked at the retreat in California, the Ananda retreat called the Expanding Light, I met retreatants who had come on retreat by themselves, who had never in their entire life been alone, ever. They were children, they grew up, they fell in love, they got married, they had children of their own. So now at age, I don't know, in their 50s maybe, Their children were teenagers or even adults, and they were empty nesters maybe. This person had never been alone. Well, so it is with devotees, We have things to work out, and when we get married, have a child, have wonderful friends, have a wonderful life, and yet it's not enough. It's a message and a signal that even we as devotees have been living too much on the periphery of life, expecting too much from the friends around us who, especially devotees who live in our Ananda communities. Eventually, everyone's going to disappoint you when you get to know them well enough. That's a delicate thing for me to say, but so long as we're not perfect, and so long as the people, we come together in these communities to become saints. We aren't saints yet. And so we too, as devotees like Arjuna, find that things are not perfect in our world, and we are finding ourselves disappointed. What's the solution? Should we change our marriage? Should we get rid of our kid? Just kidding. Should we change the outer things in our life? Well, sometimes, but truthfully, what this signals to a devotee is we need to deepen and enrich our spiritual life. It's an opportunity to cry out in pain for God, for Guru, to come to us. It's a time to practice japa, mindfulness, devotion. It's a time to chant even when we don't feel like chanting. One time long ago, I was with my wife Padma and was in a little bit of a micro depression, and I said, gee, isn't it enough to want out of this samsara, this world? And she said, no, you have to also want to love God. The answer is to love God. And if you don't feel love, then to pray for the ability to feel love, to feel devotion. And that's far more easily done, not through an abstract principle called God, but through the loving embrace of the Guru. All right.